My brother got my girlfriend pregnant, my parents kicked me out, and then drained my savings for the baby. 3 years later, they had the nerve to call me, desperate for help. My brother got my girlfriend pregnant. After that, my parents kicked me out and used all my savings to support the baby. 3 years passed before they reached out again. This time, they were desperate. For most of my life, things had seemed straightforward, or at least that's what I'd been led to believe. I was young, completely in love, and I had a vision for my life. Abby, my girlfriend, and I were steadily working toward a shared future. We were both in college, driven to graduate and start our lives together. My parents had always presented themselves as supportive and stable. They were the picture-perfect church-going pair, never missing Sunday services, constantly preaching about morals, hard work, and strong family ties. They were strict, no doubt, but I thought I could always count on them. I believed in that. Abby and I had been a couple for 2 years. We met our first year of college and immediately clicked. We had big goals, ambitious dreams. I always envisioned getting a good job, paying off my student debt, and eventually settling down in a cozy home with a backyard and maybe a golden retriever, just living the classic suburban dream. But life had other plans. I'll never forget the night Abby told me she was pregnant. Her words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I couldn't breathe. We weren't ready for this. We were still building our lives, still finding our place in the world. We had our futures planned, but this news changed everything. In the days that followed, everything felt like a whirlwind. We had long, painful conversations. Abby made it clear she wanted to keep the baby. She was terrified, but her mind was made up. And honestly, I couldn't be angry at her. I was scared too. Still, I chose to support her. Slowly, I started wrapping my head around the idea, we were going to be a family. It wasn't going to be easy, but I was willing to face it with her. And then came the blow that truly broke me. Abby confessed that she had been involved with someone else, my brother, Jake. She sobbed uncontrollably, unable to meet my eyes. Her apology was endless, but it didn't make the betrayal hurt any less. Jake wasn't just my brother. He was my best friend. And he was the father. Everything around me collapsed in that instant. My thoughts were spinning, my chest tight with disbelief. How could this happen? How could they let this happen? We had been together for 2 years. I had to hear it from him. I called Jake. When I confronted him, he was cold. No apology, no remorse. Just a flat it happened. And that I should get over it. Get over it? I couldn't even comprehend it. Then there were my parents. When they found out, their response was unnerving. They were disturbingly calm. My mom stared at me with blank eyes and muttered something about how everything happens for a reason, that this was all part of God's plan. She genuinely believed that. My dad just nodded along like it made perfect sense. They never even addressed Jake's betrayal. It was like it didn't matter. But when they started pushing me to forgive, to support Jake, that's when I lost it. They said I should be understanding, that this was a chance to be compassionate. They told me I needed to let go of the anger and accept what had happened because it's all in God's hands. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake them and ask how they couldn't see how much I was hurting. But nothing I said got through. They wouldn't budge. And then came the manipulation. They told me I had to step up. That I should support Jake and Abby. That I had to be a man, be the bigger person. That as the older brother, it was my duty to set an example. They said they'd sacrificed for me, and now it was time for me to do the same. The more they spoke, the more I felt like I was drowning. My dreams, graduating, building a career, having a life of my own, were all slipping away. I wasn't just being asked to forgive. I was being told to surrender everything I'd worked for. And then, they made it clear. I wasn't welcome anymore. There wasn't a big fight. No yelling, no door slamming. Just quiet rejection. Cold and final. They said my negative attitude was creating division. They told me I had to go. That unless I apologized to Jake and accepted the new plan, I had no place in their house. That same day, they also took the money I'd saved, my college fund, the one I'd trusted them to hold, and used it to turn my bedroom into a nursery for the baby. That was the breaking point. The room I had filled with hope and plans was now someone else's space. A place for a child I didn't father. They had erased my future. My education. My freedom. And handed it over to someone who had torn my life apart. My parents told me everything happened according to divine intention, that it was part of some grand, unseen design. But I couldn't see it that way. All I could focus on was what remained of the dreams I had poured my energy into, the beliefs I once clung to. They didn't apologize. They just insisted it had to be done. From where they stood, they were justified. This was their journey now, and I was meant to quietly accept it. So I stepped outside, shut the door behind me, and didn't glance back for 3 long years. Those first weeks felt unreal, like my entire existence had been flipped without warning. I crashed at a friend's place, more specifically, his worn-out couch. The weight of everything that had happened pressed down on me hard. It hadn't been a choice I wanted to make, but I had no alternatives. I was without a home, without support, left with nothing but my stubborn pride to keep me afloat. I didn't want to drown in self-pity, but that didn't stop the bitterness from bubbling up every time I remembered how everything had unraveled. The money saved for college? Gone. Legal recourse? Out of reach. And the silence, they didn't even reach out. That hurt the most. For the first time in my life, I wasn't part of anything. No phone calls. No messages. No Sunday dinners or family traditions. It was as if I'd been erased entirely. The same parents who once promised me the world had shut their lives off from me, treating me like a distant stranger. Any attempt I made to reach out was met with cold, clipped responses, always somehow circling back to the baby. They never asked how I was. Never tried to understand. Their focus was fixed, on Jake, on Abby, and on the child. In their lives, I didn't even make the margins. Jake became the centerpiece of every conversation. They praised his dedication, his commitment to Abby, his promising future as a father. They behaved like nothing had happened between us, like I was the traitor simply because I chose not to help. It didn't matter that Jake had violated every boundary imaginable. They placed their entire future in his hands. It was all backwards. I had given everything to help them, to stand by them, to do what I thought was right. But when I needed their support most, they left me to fend for myself, cast aside for a child that wasn't even mine. It felt like the cruelest kind of irony. They were rewriting my entire story, without asking, without listening, without caring. They were too wrapped up in their new life to notice what they'd destroyed. I spent the following months just trying to keep my head above water. I enrolled in community college. It wasn't ideal, but it gave me direction. I got a part-time job at a local cafe, scraping together rent and trying not to drown in memories of what I had lost. Still, no matter how far I pushed it down, the betrayal lingered. The resentment stayed alive, simmering quietly beneath the surface. Even after I let go of any hope that my family might come around, something happened. An unknown number lit up my phone, one I hadn't seen in years. I stared at the screen, hesitation tightening in my chest. Curiosity won. "Hello?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Son." That word trembled across the line, fragile and uncertain. It was my mother. I recognized her instantly. She said my name like it could save her, like it had power. I said nothing. Let the silence settle, let her feel the distance she had helped create. She seemed thrown off by it, and the words began to spill from her in a panicked rush, disjointed, clumsy. She said everything had fallen apart. The house was gone. Their savings, wiped out. Everything stable had vanished. She mentioned a failed investment, something vague about fraud. My father, she said, had refused to admit things were bad until it was too late. Now, they were struggling just to stay warm and fed. Her voice cracked as she asked if I was still there. I replied flatly, keeping my tone indifferent, detached. I wanted her to feel the cold wall they'd once built between us. She kept going, faltering but determined. She said she regretted how things had happened. She said she was sorry. She pleaded with me to come back, to help them. Now, she said, they needed me. I waited. Let her words sit heavy in the air. When I finally answered, my voice was composed, distant, deliberate. I reminded her, 3 years had passed since they'd decided I wasn't needed. 3 years since they stripped me of everything I had worked for, and handed it all to someone who had done nothing to deserve it. I told her I had rebuilt my life without them, slowly, painfully, brick by brick. And now she thought she could undo it all with a phone call and a few tears? I didn't shout. I didn't need to. My words cut deep without volume. She tried to speak, to defend herself. I didn't let her. I told her she couldn't just rewrite the past because the present was hard. I told her I was nothing to them then, and I remained nothing now. She broke down, asking how I could be so cold, asking if I truly hated them enough to let them suffer. She said they were my parents, that blood meant something. I laughed, and it felt foreign coming out of me. I told her family only seemed to matter to them when it was convenient. When they needed someone to fix the disaster they'd made. Then I said what I knew would hit the deepest. I told her I was only human, clearly not wise enough to grasp the divine plan. I said it sharply, throwing their own sanctified words back in their faces. I reminded her of all the times she told me to trust God's will, to put aside my pain for the sake of the family. I asked her, if this was God's plan, who was I to question it? Shouldn't I just accept it? Just like I was expected to accept being cast aside? She cried harder, begging me to come home, to forgive, to forget. She said they had changed. But I stayed firm. I told her that forgiveness wasn't mine to give, that was between her and whatever faith she had left. I wasn't their salvation. I wasn't their second chance. She tried to pull me back with memories, with nostalgia. The memories of my childhood, the rare good moments we once shared, lingered as she spoke, telling me she loved me back then and still loved me now. I told her love wasn't some switch you could flick on or off whenever it suited you. Love wasn't what they'd shown me when they tossed me aside, stripped me of any dignity I had left, drained my finances, and called it divine will. Her sobs grew louder, more frantic, but I stayed unmoved. I'd spent too many lonely nights crying into silence, too many days wondering if I'd ever feel whole again. Her tears didn't reach me anymore, they couldn't undo the damage. I told her I owed them nothing. Not my time, not my help, not even my sympathy. I said actions have consequences, and it wasn't up to me to shield them now that they were finally feeling the weight of theirs. I reminded her of the nursery they built in my old bedroom, my space, repurposed for my brother's child. I told her to turn to him now, the son they chose instead of me. If anyone should step in, it should be him. She pleaded with me not to hang up, but I was already finished. I said I hoped they'd find comfort in their faith, the same faith they had once used to shatter me, and then I ended the call. For a long while, I sat still, phone in hand, staring at nothing. I expected something to rise in me, anger, sorrow, guilt, but there was only silence. A cold, hollow stillness. They had built this wall between us, brick by brick, and now it stood unbreakable. I placed the phone down and returned to what I'd been doing, as if nothing had just happened. Maybe that was the most haunting part, not that they cried or begged, but that it no longer meant anything to me. They had turned me into a stranger, and I'd accepted the role. There was no turning back. Update 1. It was Jake. His voice came through the phone, calm, almost casual, as if we were old friends. He said he wanted to talk. The moment I heard him, memories came crashing back, of the man who helped destroy my life. My stomach knotted, my mouth went dry, but I masked it well. I kept my tone flat, distant, and asked him what he wanted. I wasn't about to make this easy. He said he knew it was complicated, but insisted that wasn't the point. There was something important he needed to tell me, something he'd been holding back for far too long. As much as I hated to admit it, I found myself listening. Somewhere deep down, a part of me still craved accountability, some acknowledgement of what he'd done. Jake spoke slowly, carefully choosing each word. He confessed that he'd made mistakes, said he hadn't handled things right, that everything had spiraled beyond his control. He said he regretted it all, and his voice softened as he claimed he never intended for things to unravel this way. For a fleeting second, I almost believed him, almost let myself think there was real remorse behind those words. But then the fury returned, faster than I could hold it back. My voice cracked as I mocked his apology. I'm sorry? Was that it? Did he really think a hollow phrase could cover the wreckage he'd left behind? His lies, his selfishness, the way he disregarded me completely, how could he think words were enough? I told him straight, his apology didn't even scratch the surface. He had demolished my life with a single careless act, and now he thought a few sentimental phrases could fix that? I wasn't having it. He didn't answer right away. I could hear the silence, thick and uneasy, as if he was scrambling for words. But I no longer cared. He wasn't sorry, not truly. He was just upset that things hadn't gone his way. His so-called regret didn't change the fact that I had been cast aside, abandoned by my own family. When he finally spoke again, his voice was low, trembling with emotion. He said he wasn't trying to guilt me, wasn't asking for anything, no money, no help. He just wanted to try to make things right, for me, for Abby, for the baby. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. But even if he meant them, it didn't matter. It was too late. He couldn't fix what was already shattered. Not for me. Not anymore. I cut him off, voice rising. I told him I didn't want to hear another word. This wasn't about redemption. This was about the pain he caused, the betrayal that could never be undone. He said sorry again, sounding more desperate this time, but I was done. He could repeat it 1,000 times and it still wouldn't mean a thing. It wouldn't erase the past. I told him to stop calling, and I hung up. Update 2. A week later, the phone rang again, 7 days exactly. But this time, it wasn't Jake. The name glowing on the screen was Abby, my brother's wife. The woman they had welcomed with open arms. The woman whose child had taken my place in their home. I hesitated. Then, curiosity got the better of me. I answered. Her voice came through gentle, cautious, like she knew she was walking on fragile ground. She greeted me softly, said she hoped I was doing well, mentioned it had been a long time. I stayed silent, letting the discomfort stretch out. I wasn't going to help her feel comfortable. Eventually, she got to the point. She said my mother had told her about our call, the state things were in, how serious it had become. She acknowledged my anger, said she understood it, but asked me to think of the child, my nephew. She said he was innocent in all of this, that he didn't deserve to suffer because of the choices made by the adults around him. I could feel my temper building, slowly, steadily. Did she really have the nerve to ask me to clean up the mess they created? And now she was using a child to tug at my heart? My jaw tightened, my pulse racing. But she kept talking. She told me my nephew admired me, even though we'd never met. She said he deserved a chance, deserved to grow up surrounded by love, not punishment passed down from grudges he didn't cause. Then she said, if I could find it in me to forgive. She said that if I could find it in myself to forgive, it would make all the difference for him. For the child they had chosen over me. But as she spoke, I felt my anger rise even higher. How could she sit there, asking me to save them from the consequences of their own actions? To forgive them when they hadn't even acknowledged the full extent of what they had done to me? How could she think I could fix this mess after everything? I felt the bitterness surge within me, a heavy weight in my chest. The audacity to think that I was the one who could make it right now. The choices had been made. The damage had been done, and no amount of pleading or reasoning could change that. I stood firm, my voice cold as I told her the truth. It was too late. They had already gone too far. No one was going to undo the destruction they had caused. And I wasn't about to be the one to step in and act like nothing had happened. I interrupted her with a cold, low voice, telling her to stop. I made it clear that I didn't want to hear another word about the child. I told her that if she thought talking about the kid would magically erase the years of pain and betrayal I had gone through, she was even more deluded than I had imagined. She stuttered, clearly taken aback by my directness, and apologized, saying she didn't mean to upset me but just wanted me to understand. She mentioned that family was meant to support each other, especially during tough times. That's when I completely lost it. I told her she had no right to lecture me about family, not after everything that had happened. I reminded her of how they had kicked me out without a second thought to make room for her and her child. I reminded her of how they had used my college savings to set up a nursery for the son of the man who had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I asked her, if you want to talk about family, maybe you should talk to my brother, the golden child. Where is he now? Why isn't he the one stepping up to fix this mess? She tried to defend him, claiming he was doing his best and working hard to provide for his family. She said they were under a lot of pressure and just needed some help to get back on their feet. I let out a bitter, harsh laugh. I told her that my brother had always been selfish, irresponsible, and a taker his whole life, and I doubted that had changed. I said if she married him expecting something different, that was her mistake, not mine. I told her I owed nothing to any of them, not her, not him, not their child. She began to cry, her voice breaking as she pleaded with me to reconsider. She said they didn't know how they were going to survive, that they were on the verge of losing everything. She said she was scared for her son's future and didn't know where else to turn. Her tears only fueled my anger. I told her that if she was scared, she should have thought about that before getting involved with my brother. I reminded her that she made her choice and now had to live with the consequences. I told her that her son's future was her responsibility, not mine. If she wanted to play the victim, she'd have to find someone else to buy into her story. She made one last attempt, her voice trembling, saying she knew I was a good person and deep down still cared about my family. She said she believed I could find it in my heart to forgive them, for the child's sake if nothing else. That was the breaking point. I let the words flow, sharp and cutting. I called her a coward for thinking she could manipulate me using a child. I called her delusional for believing I would ever forgive them. I called her selfish for expecting me to clean up the mess her husband had made. I told her that she and my brother were a perfect match, two people used to taking without giving anything in return. When I finished, her sobs were uncontrollable. She tried to say something, but I didn't let her. I told her to save her tears because they wouldn't work on me. I suggested she let my parents, my brother, and anyone else who cared know that I was done being their scapegoat. Before she could respond, I ended the call. My hands trembled, but not with regret. It was the kind of anger that leaves a bitter taste, the kind that lingers long after the flames have died down. I sat there for a moment, staring at the phone in my hand, thinking about the child she had mentioned. For a brief second, I felt a twinge of guilt, but it quickly disappeared. That child wasn't my responsibility. It wasn't my problem. I wasn't the one who brought him into a world of chaos and instability. No, that was on them, my brother, his wife, my parents. They made their choices, wrecked their lives with their own actions, and now they were scrambling to find someone to blame, someone to save them. But that person would never be me. Fast forward 315 days. When I got the call from the church, I was taken aback. I hadn't thought about them in years. Religion had been a central part of my family's life when I was growing up, but it always felt more like a tool for control than a source of comfort. The voice on the other end introduced himself as Pastor Dave, someone I vaguely remembered from my teenage years. He said he hoped I remembered him and that he was calling to discuss my family. I braced myself for the usual guilt trip or moral lecture. Instead, his tone was calm, measured, and surprisingly understanding. He told me he wasn't taking sides or trying to pressure me, but that he wanted to mediate if I was open to it. He explained that my parents had come to the church, desperate for help, and had mentioned our estrangement. He thought it would be valuable to hear my side of the story before making any assumptions. Something about his approach disarmed me. I didn't hear judgment in his voice. There was no implied obligation. He made it clear that this was entirely up to me and that he respected my right to decline. For the first time in years, it felt like someone genuinely wanted to listen, not just preach. I agreed, but on my terms. I told him this wouldn't be a sob story or a reconciliation moment. If he was calling to broker peace, he needed to understand the full story. He agreed and asked if I was willing to share my perspective. I started slowly, recounting the events that led to my departure. My tone was controlled, almost clinical, as though narrating someone else's story. Pastor Dave listened quietly, offering occasional murmurs of understanding. I told him about the years that followed, the resentment, the estrangement, the sense of betrayal that never truly faded. I described how I rebuilt my life, piece by piece, without them, and how their recent attempts at contact felt like nothing more than a desperate attempt to use me again. When I finished, there was a long silence. I could hear the faint hum of the line as Pastor Dave processed everything I had shared. Finally, he spoke, and his voice carried something unexpected: compassion. He expressed deep sympathy for everything that had happened, acknowledging that no one should have to endure such pain, especially from their own family. He admitted that he hadn't fully understood the situation before and that my parents had only given him part of the story. He told me he had been prepared to ask me to consider forgiveness. He realized that this was not simply about moving on from the past. He acknowledged that the actions of my family had left a deep, lasting impact, and that any forgiveness, if it ever came, would need to be on my terms and in my own time. There, standing before me, was someone from the church, a representative of the same faith my parents had used against me, acknowledging the suffering I had endured. It felt odd, almost surreal, like a weight I hadn't known I was carrying had been relieved, even if only a little. I told him I appreciated his empathy, but made it clear that I had no intention of reconciling with my family. I explained that their recent cries for help came across as manipulation, not true remorse. I told him I didn't believe they were capable of change and that I wasn't going to expose myself to any more hurt. Pastor Dave expressed his respect for my decision and assured me he wouldn't pressure me into reconsidering. He mentioned that healing was a deeply personal journey, and it was not his place to decide how or when I should begin that process. He said he would keep me in his prayers, not in the shallow, performative way I had become used to, but with a genuine hope that I would find peace, whatever that peace might look like. For that, I was truly thankful. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. I'll see you in the next stories.